Welcome back to Beneath the Long Man's Feet. Here I am in the woods again, of course, and Cinders is with me. She's just the other side of the camera, and she may make an appearance. And for this episode, I have a story for you. Have you ever wondered why it is that some of the bards and the artists in this world seem to be tortured souls? Well, perhaps this story will give you the answer. It's called Lament of the Bards. Now, many years ago, humankind lived in the Vale of the Gods. All of the gods, that is, not just one. And the gods looked after humankind. They gave them everything they needed, and they did not need to work. It was equality. It was a paradise, an Eden, if you like. And all mankind had to do was praise the gods and the beauty of the Vale of the Gods, and they did this very well. Now, one such man, Aidan, was walking through the Vale one day when he heard the most strangest, the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It was a kind of vibration that rose and fell. And accompanying the vibration were words that rose and fell in time with the thrumming vibrations. Aidan had never heard the like before. It was a magical sound to him. But you and I today, well, we would know this sound as someone playing a stringed instrument like the guitar or the lute, and the voice was singing. But in the Vale, man didn't make their music. The music that was there was kind of piped into their consciousness by the gods, a kind of early elevator music, if you will. So Aidan had never heard this thing before, and he was determined to find out what it was. So he pushed his way through the Vale and the thorns that surrounded the Vale, cutting his silken robes, and there he found what he could only describe as a wild-looking beast man, all hair and horns and piercing eyes. But he had the most dexterous hands and the most beautiful voice. And Aidan listened as he played and he sang, and it took Aidan to the highest emotions of happiness and the lowest lows of sadness, and of all points in between. And when the music had finished, Aidan cheered and clapped and whooped. And at this point, the beastman turned round and noticed Aidan for the first time, and he made to run away into the woods beyond. For the beastmen, the wild men, were outside the world of the gods. They were the casts off, the ugly ones that weren't looked after by the gods. And he knew to be talking to a person of the Vale of the Gods would not end well. But Aidan was insistent. He convinced him to tell him more about this music, as the beastman called it. And so eventually the beastman took Aidan to his village, where Aidan met more beast men and beast women, and they were all hair and horns and piercing eyes, but they too had the wonderful voices and the dexterous hands, and they drew pictures, and they wrote their thoughts on parchment, and they banged drums and blew whistles, and they played the lute so wonderfully. And Aidan needed to know more about this, and he studied them for a couple of weeks, and then he thought he had enough to go back to the Vale and take this new music in praise of the gods. The beastmen counselled him against it. They did not think this was a good idea. They did not think the gods would enjoy this outside influence. But Aidan would not be swayed from his course of action, and he took his instruments and his drawings and his writings and went to the square in the Vale. And there he put out his drawings, and he put out his lute, and he thrashed that lute, and he blew that whistle, and he banged that drum, and his voice bellowed and soared. And as a performance it was, well, perhaps it wasn't that good, to be honest. It was pretty poor. Aidan was still very much learning his art. But he felt wonderful, and he could see the spark in the eyes of some of those watching, and they too came to Aidan and said, "Oh, that was amazing! That was wonderful! Tell us more, Aidan. Teach us this music and this art." And so Aidan set about teaching his new club of bards. But not everybody in the Vale was so enamored with the bards. They thought the gods would be displeased, and they shunned the bards. And you know, they were right, for the gods were very displeased that this outside influence had come into their peaceful Vale. And so they called on the one that we now know as Zeus, and they called on the one that we now know as Thor, to pick up their thunderbolts and smite Aidan. And just as they were about to smite him, Aidan made an impassioned plea to the gods. We praise you now, he said, because we have to. It's in our heads to do so. But if we could make this music out of our own free will, this art to praise you and your world, surely coming from our hearts, that would be so much better. Well, it was a lot longer than that. That's the gist of the speech. Aidan being the budding bard, the original was a lot longer and a lot more flowery. But generally speaking, the gods were quite impressed by this. I say generally speaking, because the one we know as God did not want to be told what to do by a mere man. Zeus was a miserable old soul at times, and he just wanted to smite somebody. Odin wasn't quite sure which way to go. Thor, well, he just wanted to make some noise. He loved the crashing and the banging, so he wanted to smite. But Keridwen and Gaia and Buddha and Vishnu, amongst others, convinced the gods and the goddesses that perhaps Aidan had a point. And so the gods came to this compromise, which they laid to Aidan and his bards. They said, you may make your music and your art in praise of us, but you must make it outside of the veil. And outside of the veil, then your bones will wither and die, and your flesh will fall from them, and your body will die. And if you have pleased us, you may come and live the afterlife in the veil of the gods. But if you have displeased us with your art, then you will just remain dust in the wind in that world. And furthermore, this is not just a condition laid on you and your bards. This is a condition that all of humankind must follow. So, be off with you all, and make it good. And with that, Aidan and the whole of humankind traipsed out of the veil. And that was perhaps the last time there was truly peace in the whole world. The gods, no longer having mankind to look after, formed their own little clubs. God formed a club called Christianity. Odin formed a club for heathenry in the northern tradition. Zeus formed the Greek pantheon with his fellows, and there was the Celtic pantheons, and there were clubs for Islam and Sikhs and Buddhism, and there were clubs for the witches and the druids and the shamans, and there were clubs for all manner of spiritualities in between. And for a while things were quite good in the world outside of the gods' veils. But it started with a bit of banter, and then a few harsh words and distrust, and then that turned to more sort of spite and hatred. And man then started going to war with other men because they didn't believe in the same gods as him. And man started fighting other people because they should worship the same gods. Everybody should worship their gods. And this hatred and this division and this warfare blew up into mass conflicts throughout the world. And these conflicts, that division and that hatred, that continues to this very day. And that is something that the bards bear even on their conscience. They have caused this by giving man free will through their art. And yes, of course, the bards have given us some beautiful things, some beautiful art. They've given us Mozart and Beethoven. They've given us the Beatles and the Beach Boys, Jimi Hendrix and Bob Dylan, etc. But they have also given us the likes of Justin Bieber and Coldplay, and that weighs heavily on the heart of any bard, I can tell you. But what of the Beastmen, I hear you say? What are the Beastmen? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Beastmen, they continued to thrive, for they were always outside of the world of the gods, and in their hairy hornedness, they continued to make their music. And they form the likes of Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin and Metallica, and they rock the horns to this very day. But the bards bear that guilt in their souls for that decision of Aidan so long ago. And you can help them atone. You can go and see them live. You can buy their music. Local bards buy them an ale and sit them round your campfire. Let them give you a song, tell you a tale. Let them entertain you as they hope to atone for the mistakes made by Aidan and his bards so very, very long ago. And that, my friends, is the lament of the bards. And this tortured bard has now told you the tale and hopes to see you around a campfire sometime really soon. But until then, as always, my friends, I bid you hail and farewell.